Jesus. All right, I want to talk to you today. I'm going to talk to only about 10 or 15 of y'all. But the rest of you all, since you're here, you can eavesdrop in on the conversation and see where you get in and fit in. I want to talk today. I ain't got no more time for jive in 2025. No more time for jive in 2025. When you look down the corridors of your life and you take a retrospective view of some of the time that you have wasted in your life, at some point you ought to get to the place where you don't want to have a repeat factor. I mean, you ought to be sick and tired of being sick and tired of being sick and tired. 24 has been, I'm going to be nice and say 24 has been one heck of a year. But some of y'all would use another word and say 2024 has been some other kind of year. You catch that when you get to the house. 2024 has posed a lot of challenges. And much of what we have experienced in 2024, we cannot blame it on other people. You've been in predicaments and situations and circumstances all because you was jiving around. But I ain't got no time for jive in 2025. In 2024, you've been broke. In 2024, you and your mama had a whole lot of drama mixed in with some trauma. I'm going to sound a little rhythmatic, poetic for a little while, but I'm going to get into text. I know where I'm at. You wasted too much time meandering in jive. You remember Jesus and his isness, where he told us that I must be about my Father's business. Aren't you sick and tired of being stuck in mess? 2024, you was not at your best. But I want to help you that you ain't got no more time to jive in 2025. You don't look the same as you used to look. Look at your neighbor with all three teeth and just tell him I don't. All three of them. Just smile at them. "2024 has been a real blow, but I don't want to live in 2024 no more. I got to move. I got to go." As we park and ponder on the past tense of our lives, we somehow feel like Tyrone Davis, if I can turn back the hands of time. No, you don't need to turn back no hands of time. Because if you turn back, you're going to go back. And if you go back, you're going to stay back. But I don't have no time for jive in 2025. I know in 2024 you've been set back, but your setback was not designed for you to sit back. It was only a setup for a comeback. I'm going to help y'all in a minute. Did I tell y'all I was like an old car? I'm going to go slow, but then I'm going to get on the road in a minute. Your setback was a setup for a comeback. You've been set back in 2024, but you don't have no time for Jive in 2025. As a matter of fact, Tyrone Davis is still in the house. And you ought to hitch on to him when he says, I reached the turning point. See that? Everybody in the class ain't saved. Tyrone Davis says, no more running around for me. I have finally settled down. I reached the turning point. Lord. See that? There they go. There they go. In my life. Boy, look at that. So I don't mean to be nosy, and I don't mean to get in your business. But ain't you tired of where you was? Ain't you sick and tired of making those same mistakes? Because you've been in a whole lot of jive, but no more jive in 2025. Allow me to tiptoe through the tulips of your territory and push you over the cliff of your yesterday so you can land on the couch of your tomorrow. Y'all gonna let me do that? Listen, our pastor has already told us what happened in 2024. Can I tell him? Huh? He told me, our pastor told me to tell you that you had a jammed up January. You was fighting in February. You was mad as hell in March. You had an abusive April, a miserable May, a jobless June, a joyless July, an angry August, a sour September, an awkward October, and when nothing happening in November, and here you are desperate in December. He told us what happens, right? So as we think about no more jive in 2025, you know, in 2024, you've been around some foolish, fake, phony, and fictitious people. Can I say that again? You've been around some foolish, some fake, some phony, and fictitious people long enough. No more. I got to leave that place because I don't have time for jive in 2025. So here, as we are celebrating our pastor, 14 consecutive years of pastoring Cushites. Y'all know what Cushites are, right? It's them usses. It's them dark-skinned people that's been kissed by nature's sun. And some of us been in the sun longer than others, but we all are Cushites. Some call them Afro-Americans. Some perhaps call them Negroes. But my grandmama called them, I better not say that. I ain't gonna say that. 14 years, pastor, of leading and feeding God's people. The Apostle Paul, he writes 14 epistles in the New Testament. Epistles are letters that he wrote to the churches. 14 implies a double anointing of God's perfection and his grace. 14 is the 14 generations between Abraham and Joseph. 14. 14 is half of what it takes for the moon to make a complete circle. It takes 28 days for the moon to make a complete circle, but 14 days to get halfway there. The book of John. You know how he do it. John has only 14 chapters in the book of John. 14 years of pastoring is equivalent to 168 months of opening and closing the doors and coming in and out this church. 14 years is equivalent to 728 weeks of preaching and teaching. 4,380 days, 14 years. 14 years is equivalent to 101,120 minutes of walking up and down these pews, hollering, screaming, shouting, praising God. And so here today, as we look in our text, and we see the Apostle Paul. Y'all know him, the writer of most of the New Testament. The Apostle Paul, he is the globetrotter of the gospel. You can find him tiptoeing around this terrestrial ball called earth and landing his footprints in so many places. If you do your homework and you discover that Paul has landed feet in places like Galatia and Philippi, Berea and Antioch, Arabia, Tarsus, Thessalonica, Corinth, Ephesus, in the Asia Minor. He even did a speech on Mars Hill. Paul, this fella was making a speech in front of all of the intellectuals of that day. Paul, this Apostle Paul was beaten with rods. He watched his friends get hung up by meat hooks. Paul, he was stoned 2 times, found himself shipwrecked. Paul was imprisoned a total of 5 years after preaching the gospel. This Paul. And then when Paul found himself positioned in prison, instead of pouting, he puts pen to parchment, proceeds to paint a picture with his penmanship about his purpose. This Apostle Paul. Let me say that again. When Paul found himself landed in prison, instead of pouting, he gets a pen and paper and starts writing and proceeds to paint a picture of his purpose while he's yet in prison. What I've learned about many of us in 2024, when we found ourselves in prison by a circumstance, we couldn't even come to church that day. You wouldn't answer your phone. You start pouting instead of praising. You got to move past 24 because I ain't got no time for jive in 2025. When Paul writes his letters, he writes his letters from 4 different perspectives. Either Paul talks about it from a military perspective, because in Ephesians, the 6th chapter, he talks about putting on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And that's part of the problem that you had in 24. You was half naked. You didn't put all of the whole armor on. You got to put the whole armor on. You just can't put the boots on and don't put on the breastplate. You just can't put on the helmet and don't go get your sword. Are you listening to me? Paul writes his letters from 4 perspectives: military. He writes his letter from an agricultural perspective, when he says that whatsoever a man sow, that same thing shall he also reap. Not only does he write from a military perspective, but an agricultural perspective, but he also writes from an architectural perspective. Paul writes like an architect, because he talks about you are the temple of God. When you look at a temple and all of the schematics that go into building a temple, you have to have the mind of an architect. Not only from a military and agricultural and architectural, should I say, and he also writes from an athletic perspective. You hear what I'm saying? He tells us to run this race with patience, like an athlete. Which brings us to the crux of our text. And Warren Wisby would tell us, Dr. Boyd, that Paul, this writer of this epistle to the church at Philippi, he now finds himself in a prison. The prison at Philippi was not the ordinary type of prison. It was not only in prison, but it was under the prison. He was in a dungeon and he was locked up, and here he is putting pen to parchment while he's yet in prison. And so Paul opens up by saying, not as though I have already attained, neither were already perfect. What Paul was trying to get us to see is that he was dissatisfied with where he was. If you're going to be better in 2025, you're going to have to be dissatisfied with what happened in 2024. Are you listening to me? You're going to have to be able to do that, because if you don't do that, then it's not going to help you. You're going to end up right back where you started. Don't you know, you hear people often say, the Lord picked me up and turned me around. And I did a 360-degree turn. Don't you know that when you do a 360-degree turn, you right back where you started from? Huh? You just right back where you started from. You need to tell the Lord to do you a 180 so you can keep going. I'm trying to help you. Paul was saying that I'm dissatisfied, and when I did my trilogistic studies of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, y'all know him. They were 3 Greek philosophical geniuses of the 5th century. They were reigning and ruling along the time when Alexander the Great was in charge. They all came to the same startling conclusion. They said, you will never attain, you will never achieve, you will never aspire or appreciate where you are going until you are dissatisfied with where you are. You got to get to the place where I'm sick and tired, Reverend, of where I am I ain't got no more time for jive in 2025. I jived enough. I done too much. I'm stuck. I ain't going nowhere. You ever see those wheels that they have on the car? Those spinners? The car's not moving, but the wheels are spinning. And that's kind of like how some of our lives are. We standing still and we spinning around in the same place. And God is challenging us that you gotta get away from jive if you're going to strive and thrive in 2025. I'm almost done. I'm almost done. I'm almost there. So Paul was dissatisfied with where he was, so he wanted to get better and find himself in a better position in 2025. Look at your neighbor and say, I want to be better next year. I want to be happy next year. If you still stuck in that situation, you've been in it, he been promising you 10 years that he gonna marry you. He ain't gonna marry you now. I ain't gonna. You know what he doing? He's feeding you a whole lot of jive. But you gotta tell him no more jive in 2025. Hey man, you gotta get to it. So Paul was saying that he was dissatisfied. And also, Paul was also saying that this one thing I planned. He said this one. See, the problem is we're trying to do too much, and you need to just concentrate on one thing. Now, one thing I want you to concentrate on is to get out of that jive so that you can thrive in 2025. Paul says, it's one thing that I do. I plan on striving and not jive in 2025. See, the problem is that many of you have been living like we bipolar. We're living like we have bipolarism and bipolar schism, and you don't know who you are. I've discovered, and I was studying, and philosophers says that there are at least 2 personalities in all of us. But it went on to say that some of us got about 5 of them. Which one will you be today? Look at your neighbor and say, who are you today? We're living in too much duplicity. We one way, then we're another way. You one way at church, and then you another way outside the church. You're one way at the reunion, but then you one way in the hood. You speak in tongue on Sunday, but you won't speak to me. Paul is saying you got to not only be dissatisfied, but you got to be devoted. If you're going to thrive in 2025, you're going to have to put your foot to the metal, and you're going to have to be devoted. You can't be all bipolar-ish and full of duplicity. You can't treat life like the hokey pokey. You know what the hokey pokey is, right? You put your left foot in, you take your left foot out and put your left foot in, and you shake it all about. You do the hokey pokey and you turn yourself around. That's what it's all about. And some of you all have graduated from the hokey pokey until you're living under the almond joy syndrome. So what is the almond joy? I'm glad you asked. Sometimes I feel like a nut. And sometimes I don't. You got to get some stability in your head and get devoted. You understand me? Because you nutty at times, and don't nobody want to be bothered with nutty people. I'm just talking about me now. I ain't talking about you. I told y'all I'm only preaching to about 10 of y'all. The rest of y'all can listen in on the conversation. So you have to have some devotion about getting away from that dissatisfaction. Are you listening to me? And so Paul was moving on in the 3rd chapter, in that 13th verse, the C clause. He says, I am forgetting those things which are behind, and I'm reaching forth unto those things which are ahead. Forgetting does not mean failure to remember. Forgetting is not having dementia in this case. Paul is not experiencing dementia, but he is experiencing the don't mention it. Don't mention the pain I went through last year. I don't want to talk about that. Don't mention how I was handcuffed in that relationship. Don't mention that. Don't mention how I'm working extra hours and ain't getting extra money. Don't you mention that. I am putting 2024 behind. I don't have no time to jive in 2025. Paul is forgetting. It's not that he's under some type of hypnosis or he has some type of brain malfunction. That's not what it is. In order for you to attain and get what's ahead, you're going to have to forget some stuff which is behind. You got to forget some people, some places, and some things. You got to do that. Tell yourself, I got to let that go. You got to let it go. And I know it feels good. I know and all of that. I know. Don't let nobody tell you sin feels good. That's why you stay in it. It feels good. So but you got to forget it. Because what God has for you to do coming up. The reason why you can't get there, the devil keep putting distractions in your way. And he's already had a sneak preview of the coming attractions. And you got to know that God wants you to forget some stuff so that he can get you and get your hand on some new stuff. You got to forget some old people because God want to introduce you to some new people. You got to let go of some of that old money because God is trying to give you, Lord, some new money. And you can't get no new money holding on to the old money. You got some old friends that you need to loose them and let them Negroes go. Because God, he got some new people that he wants you to meet. Did y'all hear me? You can never get big if you keep holding on to little. Did y'all hear me? I got to leave you now. But Paul, did y'all hear what I said? Paul, he said that I'm dissatisfied. Paul, he said I got to get devoted. Paul, he said I got to get some direction. Did you hear me? And my direction is I'm forgetting what's behind and I'm going forward to get what's ahead. Nudge your neighbor and say, neighbor, it's time for you to move on. I heard the songwriter said, I'm moving forward, no turning back. Yes, I'm happy because I'm on the right track. Please don't hinder me because I'm trying, Lord, to make a change. I'm going all the way and I'm going on in Jesus' name. Is there anybody here? Are you ready to go forward? Grab you a neighbor and say, neighbor, y'all ain't grabbing nobody. Grab you a neighbor by the hand and say, neighbor, last year, 2024, I was in a whole lot of jive. I got stuck in some mess, but I ain't got time for jive in 2025. Grab your neighbor and say, neighbor, I'm coming out. I'm coming out next year. And when I come out, I'm dragging you with me. Pull on that neighbor. Jerk on that neighbor and say, neighbor, you ought to be dissatisfied about the stuff that you're in. You got to get devoted and you got to get direction. But last, but show them not least, grab your neighbor and say, last, but the show ain't the least. I got determination. I'm coming out of here. You got to have the same kind of determination that the woman with the issue of blood. Some of y'all got issues in here and you still bleeding from your issue. Tell your neighbor, I'm stopping this bleeding. I'm coming out of here. I ain't got time to waste no more time. I've been in jive, but no more jive. Somebody say no more. No more jive in 2025. Leave you. See y'all later. Thank you, Dr. Boyd. 14 years of pastoring this church, but you ain't got time for no more jive in 2025. You got a church to build. You got a family to raise. You got a book to write. Did y'all hear me? No more jive in 2025. And before I leave you, let me tell you, Jesus, somebody say Jesus, Jesus wasn't jiving around. They hung my Lord. They marched him in. They hung him high. And they stretched him wide. They tried to discourage him. He said, no more jive. I got to be about my Father's business. Is there anybody here? No, God got business for you to take care of. And you need to get busy taking care of the Lord's business. I got to leave you. But Jesus, on that cross, they hung him high. They stretched him wide and they dropped him low. Jesus, somebody say Jesus, Jesus, oh Jesus, hey Lord, oh shoot here, I feel my help, push it on in here. Look at Jesus on the cross, two thieves, one on the left, one on the right. Look at Jesus hanging right there from the 6th to the 9th hour. He had business to take care of. He wasn't jiving. He looked at one thief and he said to him, thou shalt be with me in paradise. Did y'all hear me? He wasn't jiving. Look down at the apostle. Looked at the disciple and say, hold your mama. Mama, this is your son. He wasn't jiving. He looked up heaven. He said, Lord, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. I got to go, but on my way, nudge your neighbor just one more time and say, neighbor, you ain't got time to jive in 2025 because God is ready to take you to another level. And as we strive to go to the next level, you got to drop off some stuff, drop off some people. And when you go up, you got to be careful. Everybody can't go where the Lord is trying to take you. And when he start lifting you up, when he start shifting your atmosphere, when he start doing things that only he can do, he's depending on you not to jive. In 2025, I've got to go. Y'all help me go to the next level. Excuse me here. Jesus went to the next level when he said, if I be lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all men unto me. I'll bring in the dope fiend, I'll bring in the addict, I'll bring in the prostitute, because I ain't jiving. Look, Claire, there's some dope fiends, there's some prostitutes, there's some addicts out there. You don't have time to jive in 2025 because somebody is looking for a miracle. Look at your neighbor and say, neighbor, I've got to leave y'all. They hung him high, stretched him wide, dropped him low. He went down in the belly of the earth, held a three-day revival. Did y'all hear me? A 3-day revival. While he was there, the saints of old was hanging out with him. Zephaniah was there. Zechariah was there. Malachi was there. Did y'all hear me? Obadiah was there. Jeremiah was there. Daniel was there. Hosea and Jonah, they all were at the meeting. And Jesus, he sent a message up to the heavenly host. He said to them, I need a wake-up call. And they asked him, what time do you want me to wake you up? Should it be 7? Should it be 5? Should it be 3? And Jesus said, no different. Make no difference what time you wake me up. Just make sure it's early. I said make sure it's early. In the morning, I need to get up. Did y'all hear me? I'll see y'all later. Love your neighbor. Cause I ain't got time for no jive. In 2025, I got to press toward the mark of the prize of the high calling of Christ Jesus. Did y'all hear me? You got to push your way. You got to press your way. Some of y'all in some mess just right now. But if you want to come out, you're going to have to press your way. High five your neighbor and say push. Say push. Say push. You're pregnant with possibility, but you gotta press your way. Somebody say yeah. Say yeah. Say yeah. Say yeah. Say yeah. If you know the Lord been good, then you ought to say yeah. If you know you've been in some jive and the Lord brought you out, you need to say he's good. I got to go, boy. But I remember what you used to say. You just said it just last week. You said, I may not know 3 things. I may not know 2 things. But one thing I do know, I'm coming out this jive. One thing, did y'all hear me? I may not know 4 things. I may not know 6 things. I may not know 2 things. But one thing I know he been good. I know he been good. Anybody know he been good? You ought to not mind. You've been good to me. You've been good in the morning. You've been good on my job. You've been good in my home. You've been good. Somebody say good. Good, good, good. Good, good, good. Good, 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 good. Good, 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 good. Look at your neighbor and say, he been good. Sure enough been good. I know he been good. I know he been good. How many know he been good? How many sick and tired of being in your jive? Tell your neighbor it's about to be 25 and I'm gonna strive. No more jive. Paul said, I'm forgetting all of that mess that I used to be in, things I used to do. I'm not gonna do no more. Places I used to go, I ain't going there no more. I'm striving. I ain't got no jive in 2025 because the Lord been good to you. You should have been cuckoo. You should have lost your mind. The Lord is still keeping you with that high blood pressure. The Lord is still holding you with them diabetes. The Lord is still got you because with diabetes, congestive heart failure. Look at your neighbor and say, Nate, and say, Nate, the Lord got me. I got to leave you, but I'm reminded of a story that I heard. It was a young lady living on the 6th floor of the LeClaire projects. She was cooking chicken in the kitchen, and her little baby girl was hanging out on the balcony. She turned her head, looked around, and the little girl done fell to the ground. Mama jumped up, ran outside, grabbed the little girl, and said, Lord have mercy. She was frantic. She was all messed up. And she said, baby, are you all right? She said, yes, Mama, I feel all right. She said, how do you know that you feel all right? She looked up towards heaven and said, him caught me. Did y'all hear what I said? The ambulance came, took her to the doctor, gave her an exam, and when they got in the emergency room, the doctor said, little girl, what happened? She said, I was playing on the balcony, and when I fell, him caught me. Did y'all hear me? They kept saying, who is him? She said, him caught me. Brought her mama in and said, this little girl keep talking about him caught me. She said, who is him? Mama said, I don't know. They said, well, she all right. You can take her home. They took her home. She walked in the door. She started jumping. She started shouting. She looked at a picture of Jesus on the wall. She said, him caught me. It was him. It was him. It was him. Anybody know him? While you was in your mess, while you was jiving around, him caught you. When you were doing what you were doing, you didn't get no disease because him caught you. High five your neighbor and say, neighbor, him caught me. Him caught me. Him caught me. I know he been good. I know he been. It was him that caught me when I was sinking deep in sin, far from the peaceful shore, seeking deeply, staying within, looking to ride no more. But the master of the sea, he had Somebody say he heard. He heard my despairing cry from the water. Hey! Yeah! I know he been good. I know he been good. Anybody know he been good? Wave them in the air like you just don't care. Tell your neighbor, I don't have time for jive. In 2025, look at your neighbor. Grab your own self. Wrap your arms around yourself and tell yourself, I've been through the storm and the rain. Yeah, I made it. Had some heartaches and pain. Yeah, I made it. Anybody here made it like I did? I've been down to my last dime. I still made it. Jesus stepped in on time. Hey, hey. I made it. Some of y'all say, why he preached like that? Because you don't know. You don't know what the Lord has done for me. You don't know how the Lord set me free. You don't know. Done for me. You don't